Hey everyone! So today I'm going to be doing a video that literally no one has asked me to make. I mean, no one has asked me to make any of my videos, so really I'm going to be talking about tips to get an internship, specifically a software engineering internship. And I have gone through 3 different software recruiting internship processes. One of them was for AMEX, which was in January of my freshman year, and that was for the summer of my freshman year. The second one was for Google, which was for the fall of my sophomore year. I took a gap semester, and if you want to know a little bit more about that, I can link the video up here. And the third one was for Facebook, which I completed in October, but it was actually for the summer of my sophomore year, which I am currently in. And if you want to know know a little bit more like working for Facebook, here are some videos as well. A really quick debrief of the typical recruiting process for a software engineering internship. The first step is the resume submission, and it's usually just like a form plus your resume, and that's your first round. Honestly, that's the first filter. And then the second round is like a coding challenge. Usually on some kind of interview software, usually like HackerRank. So try to get familiar with that assessment process and how it looks and how to like change the language that you're using so you're not like frazzled when you're taking the test. Usually interview, depending on how big the company is, they might have 2 different interviews, or if they want to like reassess you, just usually sit down with an engineer and they'll just give you 1 or 2 or 3 coding questions depending on how fast you solve them, and you just literally have to type it out on either CodePen or Google Docs for Google. I don't know why they use Google Docs, it's kind of whack. But yeah, you just basically type it out, and sometimes they won't even have you run it. They'll just like see how you do. And it's kind of scary, yeah. They'll have you like debug it on the spot and try to like figure out and solve the problem. If you got it wrong in some places, it just kind of goes stagnant, and like it will take like 1 or 2 weeks to get back to you probably. And you will end up getting an offer or getting rejected. And don't be really sad about your rejections. So many software companies out there that you can apply to. There's so many jobs out there that you can apply to that like 1 rejection isn't gonna mean anything. Fat disclaimer, like this is just how I prepared for my interviews and my recruiting process and how I went through it. This is like what works for me as a pretty average student. Like I don't do super well in school, and I'm definitely not a coding god or a genius. But these are some of the things that helped me out. So the first one I'm going to talk about is starting your apps early. And I can't stress this enough, because once the school year starts, your kind of mind just goes out the door in terms of like how to balance school and recruiting process. Recruiting is like having a full-time course or like a full-time job. It takes a lot out of you, and it also takes a lot of time. So I would highly recommend starting early. Also, the recruiting processes for large companies such as Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, they start in August to September. So you can send in your apps as early as August, start your interviews in the beginning of September, and literally get an offer by probably the end of September to October. This really helps so when you're dealing with like midterms and studying for tests, you're not also worried about studying for interviews. I think for me, the best time to recruit is right after your summer internship ends, if you have one, or like your summer classes end, and before your school starts. That's when you should be sending out the most applications, trying to get referrals and trying to do the most before you have to deal with school and everything else. So a lot of these recruiting processes are done on a rolling basis, so starting early can actually give you better chances of actually landing the job, because less positions are filled and they have more room to take in a lot more people. And also the interviewers will be less tired. They'll have the whole summer off of no recruiting, and they'll be ready to like do interviews and excited to do interviews. Whereas if you like interview in December, January, or February, or things like that, they'll probably be like done with like doing interviews for, I don't know, 5 months already. Second thing that I will say, and it's probably the most important tip that I'm going to give this entire video, is to actually study for your interviews. I can't stress this enough. A lot of people dismiss interviews thinking that, oh, I can just wing it, or I can just probably think of these things on the spot. I don't really have to prepare. But for specifically software engineering internship interviews, a lot of them tend to be super technical. And these are the things that you really need to study for, and if you didn't learn them in class and you don't have that class fresh in your mind and those concepts fresh in your mind, it's going to be really tough to do well on this interview. So I would say the most important concepts and the ones that show up the most on the interviews include dynamic programming, recursion, arrays, DFS, BFS, tree manipulation, binary search trees, things like that, sorting, and hashing. Get really good at answering those questions in the most efficient way possible as well. We'll also know how to do the naive approach, but you really need to know how to extrapolate that and be able to form efficient algorithm from that. For me, LeetCode worked the best. They had a whole list of top 100 questions asked during interviews, and I pretty much did almost the entirety of that list before starting to heavily recruit for my companies before my sophomore year. I also say they have these forums where people just ask random questions, but you can filter them by like Facebook or Amazon or Google, and they will literally show you questions that are pretty similar to the ones that they will ask you during the interview, so you can get a feel of how these people are approaching these interview questions, also what the interviewers expect of interviewees. The things that I did that really helped me during my interviews was making these cheat sheets. I make them a lot for school, and I separate them into 3 columns and just like write down random questions or concepts that I tend to forget, such as like DFS or BFS. You probably don't know how to like come up with that in your mind, but honestly I didn't really look at the papers during my interview. I was kind of more focused on like trying to code really fast, but I would say that just having this paper in front of me just gave me a lot of comfort. It's just like, you know how in your coding classes they'll sometimes give you the opportunity to make these cheat sheets, and you probably won't look at it during your exam because you're just like focused on doing the exam itself, but just having it there just gives you a lot of comfort. Like small things for reference like syntax and things like that, it'll always be there. Like I know it's really easy to code on LeetCode and just go through the questions and answer them and try to look at the solutions as soon as possible, but taking the time to actually copying it down onto a piece of paper and writing them in really small font, it actually like trains your brain to remember how to approach those problems. I am so guilty of always looking at the solutions as soon as I hit a road bump, but now I make sure that if I'm ever having trouble solving a problem, I make sure to write it down on a piece of paper or put it on a separate file on my computer. So when I'm studying for the interview on like a day or an hour before the interview, I am pushing these things into my mind and remembering what I felt during that moment and what I was supposed to do to solve the problem. Most people tend to take data structures, which is probably the most important class before you interview. People take data structures typically in their like freshman or sophomore year. So when you're recruiting specifically like before your junior year or your senior year for full-time positions, you're definitely not going to have data structures fresh in your mind. And that's really what's going to be tested on these interviews. So you want to make sure that you're refreshing yourself on those concepts, going back on even those tests that you took in data structures, and trying to prepare. Actively prepare, actively study. I promise you, if you study for these interviews like you're studying for a final exam in one of your CS classes, you will do so much better and you'll be so much more confident during these interviews. Really big tip, they almost will always ask you about runtime of your algorithms. So make sure you understand your algorithm and know what runtime it is. Try to refresh your memory on those, what is it called, like big data notations, in order to give the most accurate answer possible. Be able to answer that question. It's like literally like a yes or no question and it's right or wrong, so you really want to be able to answer that. And if you answer it wrong, it kind of shows that you don't really understand what you were writing in code. I write a lot of my big data notation on my cheat sheets in order to just like know right off the bat, like see specifically what is BFS or what is DFS. If you see the same pattern of like for loop or calling recursively, then you'll have an idea of around what the runtime is supposed to be, and you can probably get a better idea of what it actually is. Sometimes you'll come up with an algorithm. Maybe it's like the most timely one possible because you only have like, what, 40 minutes to answer the question. And that's like all you could come up with because you have other questions involved. But they'll ask you like, oh, this is a great algorithm, but what are some improvements that you can make? And you want to be able to answer this like right off the bat, like space complexity, time complexity, something along those lines. Some random questions that they might ask you is like the benefits of one language over another, comparing Java and Python, and like what's better in different situations. And yeah, you want to know those answers. You can probably find like a list online, and I'll write some of the questions that I've seen on interviews down below, because they're super random sometimes and kind of hard to answer right on the spot if you don't really know what they're looking for. I would say most interview questions fall in the category of medium on LeetCode. If they ever ask you like an easy question, unless it's like a warm-up or something like that. So most of the questions I wouldn't classify as hard on these interviews. I would definitely recommend doing the hard questions on LeetCode and HackerRank. It'll really help you get familiar with how to solve difficult problems and make you significantly less stressed because you are confident in solving problems when you're doing your interview. Also, I just want to put this out there, I forgot to say it earlier, but there's a lot of different companies that try to charge you money for getting internship. Right now, there's enough free resources for coding challenges and interview prep online that's just publicly available. Like, I love LeetCode and it's helped me so much, but they're definitely gonna try to charge you for those lists of specific companies' questions. On their forums, you're gonna literally find a shit ton of people who have put down some questions from the companies, and it's basically like the same thing, so you don't need to pay for any of that service. Yeah, LeetCode, don't come after me, but don't spend too much time thinking of the solution without typing it out or like collecting your thoughts and talking through your thought process. Your interviewer is just kind of waiting there and like waiting for you to do something, so you really want to make sure you're actively engaging, even if you're thinking, just like listing out the possibilities that you could do to solve this algorithm. I will just repeat the question back one time and go through all the possibilities there are to solving it, recursively, iteratively, what's the best way, and how I'm gonna approach it. Throughout the interview, you want to be talking through your entire process. You don't want to just be like sitting there, and I have a really hard time doing this because I am a terrible multitasker, but you really want to be trying to like type and think about it while you're like talking, or take pauses like while you're typing to just like go over what you just did, just to reassure to the interviewer that you're actually understanding what you're writing out, that you are actually thinking through this thing and having a thought process. So number 4, make sure you have some responses prepared. Like a lot of the times when I talk to interviewers, they sound like they've been like really bogged down the entire day, and I try to be as like cheery and nice and like excited as possible, and really putting forward like showing how much I'm passionate about their product. So you really want to have some of these responses prepared. First of all, you want to have your introduction, which is your 2 to 3 minute brief over your experience, your school that you go to, the grade that you are in, jobs you've had in the past, research that you've done, activities that you do at school, and other things that you're passionate about, or like projects that you built in the past that you like really like, and also like kind of the tech stack you're familiar with or most familiar with. And so having that set in stone and knowing what to say, that will start your interview off really strong, and you'll also be more confident to answer any other questions. I would recommend also including some passion projects, and if you don't have any passion projects, try to create one. It's not that hard to create a mobile application or a web application and just to like solve one of the problems at your school or in your community. Just to show that you have a soul and you're not like in it for the money, which I know some people are, but you don't want to come across that in your interviews whatsoever. Second thing you would want to prepare ahead of time is knowing the product. When I started interviewing for software engineering jobs, I kind of just went with it and like expected that I knew most of the products, but it really shows if you don't really know what they do. You want to make sure you know specifics about the products that you can mention, as well as like their company culture and things like that you can say that you really look forward to. You don't want to just be super vague and say like, oh, I'm interested in cloud computing, I'm interested in machine learning. They probably heard that shit a billion times. You don't want to be like just the rest of them. Tip for just being in like software engineering interviews, I think the most important thing is being like excited and passionate, or at least act like it. Usually the people who are interviewing you are engineers who are taking their time out of their day to give you technical questions to answer. Like 70% of the time, they just seem like they've been working all day and are super tired and don't really want to talk to a person about, I don't know, data structures. Kind of brighten their day. Even if you're not exactly successful in trying to make them excited, at least try to act like you're excited and you're passionate about the project, and it'll just like be something different during the day, because I know how draining a full day of coding can be. So they probably are looking for someone who's just bringing a little light into their day. So be that light and be happy as much as you can, even when you're stressed as fuck. Another tip that I would say is try practicing mock interviews. You can always reach out to friends or family to try to give you like separate questions, and treat it like an interview. Make sure that you're not like going back and looking at solutions during these interviews, so you actually know how it feels to struggle during an interview and try to problem solve your way and debug your way into a solution. And to practice on, what I would say is really helpful is also to schedule your interviews based on how bad you want the job. So interviews that typically give you like a 2-week span of when you can schedule the interviews and say you're free. And so the ones that I wasn't super passionate about, I would schedule them before the ones that I really wanted, and beforehand really set you up to do well, and put you in the interview mindset to do well in the ones that you're really passionate about. Basically doing mock interviews, but they're actually like real interviews. It's really kind of obvious, but make sure your resume is really great. You can always reach out to people to look over your resume, like older students, people in the clubs that you're in, organizations, research professors, people like that. Make sure that the things that you're saying on your resume are really descriptive in the least amount of words possible. So a lot of people will just like throw away all their like description lines after their title, and I used to do this as well, and someone told me like, wait, what the fuck are you writing here? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. I was like, good point. So you try to add as many numbers as you can as possible to show the impact that you've had, and also like specific tech things that you implemented. Don't be like, I just worked on machine learning, or I just worked on this mobile application or web application. Like, try to give specific details on like the tech stack you used, and also like the impact the product had or your work had. First up of all the recruiting processes for software engineering internships, start with the resume. And it's the first thing that I see, and it's the first filter. And if you don't get past the resume section, you're not even going to get the coding challenge or whatever, or the next interview. So you really want to make sure that your resume is good and you're putting your best foot forward right initially. You don't want to be cut after the first round. And I have been through that. It's not fun. The tip that I would say is try to be really on top of communicating with your recruiter or your interviewer or whoever you're talking to in the company. You want to make sure that you're responding to the emails as soon as possible. Like, literally, when I got an email back from any of the recruiters, I would just like drop everything and be like, I need to reply to this person as soon as possible, because then they might be still have their email open and they can respond right away. Just don't want to get lost in inboxes. So make sure that you're replying as soon as you can, and that will help you get faster results, and be able to like schedule interviews and get offers quicker. And finally, just a little thing about how you can make your application stronger. I would say use your connections and your referrals as much as you can. So one of the programs that really helped me was Rewrite the Code, which is basically a group of a lot of girls from a number of different universities from all across the country, and they basically are part of this like community. I don't really actively participate in that much, which is probably kind of bad, but it really helped me with the recruiting process because it gave me a list of names that I could go and ask and reach out to refer to. Remember, they'll ask you if you're interning or working for any company, and if you're comfortable giving referrals to other people, and if you are, they'll just put you on a list with like your contact information, and anyone can just reach out to you. So I reached out to a number of different people when I was recruiting and try to get referrals from random people, and it entirely sure about like what goes on in the background of these engineering recruiting processes, but I assume that people who get referrals and people who don't get referrals probably go into separate different piles. I feel like when I do get referrals, I get more immediate answers from my status of my application when I first submit it. It can't hurt to like try to get a referral from someone else. Your younger years, like your freshman or sophomore year, one of the ways I was successful with getting an American Express was by reaching out to one of my childhood friends' moms who was pretty high up in American Express a few years ago, and she reached out to one of her old coworkers and she got me an interview. Like, I didn't have to go through the entire recruiting process, and especially as a freshman, literally have gone through one semester of schooling, this was super helpful for me. I have connections, try to make the most of them, especially if you're young. I know it can be scary to reach out to people, but just sending an email wouldn't hurt. Utilize platforms such as LinkedIn, which give you a ton of different connections that you may not even know of. Me, I actually used LinkedIn when I was recruiting for Google, and they had this time where they're like doing team matching, and it was really difficult for me to get matched with a team. I tried reaching out on LinkedIn and filtering by school and by Google, and a bunch of different people like reached back out to me and they were like, oh, this is great. I will try to send in something to get you an interview for the team matching process. This like sit down talk was really helpful, and you guys can use these tips to get the internships that you want. Especially for a field like software engineering where there's a lot of jobs, I don't think people care that much about the school you go to. You just really want to showcase what you know, and that's most important. So make sure you're studying for these interviews and preparing as much as you can beforehand, scheduling these interviews mindfully, and just showing your excitement and your passion for coding. It's really important. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys today. And if you guys have any additional questions about the Google or Facebook recruiting process or American Express, just let me know in the comments. I hope this really helps. Yeah.